Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be taking a look at some of Michel Foucault's work.
Ah, Foucault.
Yeah, specifically his book, The History of Sexuality, Volume 1, an introduction.
Right.
And we're going to be looking at Part 2,
All right.
which is called the Repressive Hypothesis.
Sounds interesting.
And, we've all heard this idea that the Victorian era was, super uptight about sex.
Right.
And then the 20th century came along and, the sexual revolution,
Yeah.
free love and all that.
Yeah.
But Foucault, he kind of complicates that simple story.
He does, yeah. He really challenges that straightforward kind of before and after narrative.
Right.
What Foucault says is that beginning in like the 17th century,
Okay.
there was this like a huge increase in how much people were talking about sex.
So we're more talking about sex.
Way more.
Okay.
Yeah, not less talk, but way more.
Okay.
And he calls this an incitement to discourse.
So instead of like hushing it up, they're actually
Right.
wanting people to like,
Yes, spill the beans. Like, tell them everything.
yeah.
Okay. But I thought, like, talking about sex means more freedom.
Yeah, that's what we've always.
Right. That's the assumption.
Right, exactly.
But then what Foucault is saying is, like, maybe we've just traded one type of control
yeah.
for a different type of control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like maybe instead of outright prohibition, we have this constant pressure
Yeah.
to analyze,
Yeah.
to confess. It's
Yeah.
like maybe we've just created a whole new set of rules to follow.
Okay, so to understand this shift, he goes back and he looks at a bunch of different historical examples.
Right.
And one that stood out to me was he talks about confession
Confess.
in the Catholic Church after the Council of Trent.
Yeah, and that's a really vivid example.
Yeah.
Because imagine you go to confession.
Right.
And it's not just like,
Right.
I lied, I cheated, I stole.
Yeah.
Now you're expected to give this like super detailed account
Oh, wow.
of all your sexual thoughts and actions.
Really, like, down to the nitty gritty.
It's like Big Brother in the confessional.
It is. It's like someone's always watching.
Right. And how is that freeing?
Right. It makes you wonder, like, is all this revealing really liberating, or is it
just a way to like,
or is it a really sneaky
yeah.
form of control?
Right. Yeah. And then he goes on to say it's not just religion.
Exactly.
It pops up in other places too.
It starts popping up everywhere.
Like where?
Well, think about science and medicine.
Okay.
We have all these systems now for categorizing and diagnosing sexual behaviors. Like, we want to put everything in a neat little box.
Yeah.
And I think Foucault is asking us to consider, like, could this be part of the same impulse?
Oh, so it's like, even when we think we're being objective and scientific about it,
Right.
we're still kind of caught up in this web of like
Exactly.
control.
Yeah.
But I mean, isn't it good that we're more open about sex now? I mean, we're not.
And that's where it gets really tricky. Because Foucault points out that by the 18th and 19th centuries, talk about sex had exploded.
Really?
It was everywhere, in
Wow.
education, in medicine, in psychiatry.
Everywhere.
But he doesn't see this as a sign of liberation. He sees it as a way of managing and regulating sexuality.
Okay, so more talk
No.
doesn't equal more freedom.
Right. More talk might just mean more sophisticated methods of control.
And he uses some pretty crazy examples.
Yeah, some wild historical examples.
Yeah, he talks about this incident in a French village
Oh, yeah.
where this peasant does
No,
something.
seemingly minor sexual transgression.
Yeah, and it becomes this huge deal.
It blows up.
The doctors, the lawyers.
Everyone's all over it.
And it's like, why?
And it shows you that it's not really about the act itself.
Right.
It's about how it gets caught up in these systems of power and knowledge.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, and, he also talks about how this happened in schools, too.
Oh, so like schools become like...
Yeah, they become sites of surveillance, particularly focused on,
Like kids?
yeah, the sexuality of children and adolescents.
That's a little creepy.
It is a little unsettling.
It is, and it makes you think about all the ways that we categorize different sexualities.
Right.
Like today.
Mm-hmm.
And Foucault actually had some pretty strong opinions about that.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Yeah, like tell me about that.
Well, he really pushed back against this idea that just because we talk about different sexual practices and identities, that we're actually accepting them.
So just because we're talking about it doesn't mean
Exactly.
we're okay with it.
Yeah, he actually says that focusing on these perversions and trying to categorize them was another way to control sexuality.
So are you saying that studying all these different sexualities,
It's possible.
you could actually be doing more harm than good?
It's a question that Foucault wants us to ask. It's like, are we embracing diversity or are we just creating these new boxes to put people in?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, instead of freeing people, we're just creating new and maybe more subtle ways to
Right.
control them.
Exactly. And he uses the example of the homosexual
Okay.
as a distinct identity category.
Okay.
Because before the 19th century, same-sex acts might have been condemned,
Right.
but the idea of a homosexual person as like a distinct type of person,
Okay.
that didn't really exist.
It was just like the act itself.
Right. It was the act,
Not the person.
not the person. And Foucault argues that it was this intense focus on categorizing sexuality
Okay.
that actually created that identity.
Wow.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, is something similar happening today?
With all the different labels and identities that we have.
Exactly.
Right. That's a
Yeah.
good point. But, okay, so we've got this, like, web of control.
Yeah.
This rise of biopower. This explosion of categories and labels.
Right.
Why, though? Like, what was the point of all this?
Well, Foucault argues that this wasn't just like a random historical accident.
Okay.
This shift in discourse and the rise of biopower served a purpose. It was to manage populations.
Okay, so, like, governments and institutions are getting more control.
Exactly. They're getting more information. They're
Right.
getting more control.
But then didn't this also lead to improvements in, like, public health and stuff?
Absolutely. And Foucault isn't saying it was all bad.
Okay.
He's pointing at the complexity of it all.
Right.
It's like there were both benefits and drawbacks.
And that complexity is what makes it so interesting, I think.
Yeah, and so relevant even today.
Yeah. Because we might not have those same strict social codes
Right.
as the Victorians, but we're still living with this legacy of this system, right?
Yeah,
Especially in how we experience our own sexuality.
absolutely.
And Foucault is like, he gives us this new way to see the world.
Yeah, he gives us this new lens.
Yeah, and it's to question the things that we just take for granted. And I think that's super important today when we have so much access to information.
Absolutely.
Right.
Especially when it comes to sexuality.
Yeah, and all these different ways to express ourselves.
Right.
Like, do you think Foucault would have been fascinated by the internet?
Oh, absolutely. I think the internet would blown his mind.
Yeah.
Because it's like everything he was talking about
Yeah.
just magnified 1,000 times.
Right.
It has this incredible potential for liberation,
Yeah.
but also for control and surveillance.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like Foucault's panopticon.
Oh, yeah, the panopticon on steroids.
For people who don't know. Yeah.
What is that?
So the panopticon was this prison design
Okay.
where the guards could potentially see every prisoner
Mm-hmm.
at any time,
Okay.
but the prisoners never knew if they were being watched or not.
So they're just constantly, like, on edge.
Yeah, constantly policing their own behavior,
Right.
just in case.
And that's what's so scary about the internet.
Right. Because we're constantly sharing information about ourselves,
Yeah.
our desires, our preferences.
Right.
All of that data is being collected and analyzed. Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, are we really expressing ourselves freely?
Or are we just playing into this system of surveillance and control?
It's a really unsettling thought.
It is.
Oh.
And this leads perfectly into what I wanted to explore next, which is this whole idea of confession
Okay.
and how it plays out in the digital age.
Yeah.
Because it's like we've taken the Catholic confessional
Uh-huh.
and we've turned it into this global phenomenon.
We have.
It's everywhere. Yeah, like think about social media. We're
Right.
constantly sharing details about our lives,
Yeah.
our relationships, our deepest thoughts and feelings.
And it's not just to our friends.
And right.
It's to the entire world.
Yeah, and we're encouraged to do it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the more you share, the more likes you get,
Uh-huh.
the more followers you have.
The more validation you receive.
Right.
And it's almost like this digital currency
Yeah.
that we're all chasing.
Yeah. And so on one hand,
Right.
you could say social media has created this space for people to express themselves more freely, to find community,
Yeah.
to challenge norms.
But then at the same time, it's also this incredible machine for...
Yeah, for collecting data,
Yeah.
for analyzing our desires,
For shaping our behavior.
for shaping our behavior.
So it's like this double-edged sword.
It is.
We have more freedom to express ourselves,
Yeah.
but we're also more visible,
Uh-huh.
more trackable.
More susceptible to manipulation.
It's like we're all living in this giant digital panopticon.
It's like Foucault's worst nightmare come to life.
It's a little freaky.
It is a little freaky.
But okay, so before we go too far down the rabbit hole,
Yeah.
let's bring it back to Foucault.
Oh, okay.
Like, what was he really trying to do with his work?
Yeah, he wasn't just trying to make us paranoid.
Right.
He was really concerned with the ways in which power operates
Yeah.
in these really subtle and often invisible ways.
Mm-hmm.
And he believed that by understanding those mechanisms, we could start to resist them.
Okay, so it's not about giving us the answers.
No.
It's about giving us the tools to think for ourselves.
Exactly. It's about asking the right questions.
So it's like he's handing us this flashlight.
Yeah.
And he's saying, go explore the dark corners.
Go explore the dark corners.
But he's not telling us what we're going to find.
Exactly.
I like that. And that's why I think his work is so relevant.
Absolutely.
Even today.
More than ever.
Yeah.
In a world that's so digital.
Yeah.
So interconnected.
So complex.
So complex.
Yeah. All right. So where does this leave us?
That's a good question.
If we accept Foucault's argument that sexuality isn't just about repression or liberation, it's about this web of power and discourse.
Right.
What does that mean for like our own lives?
Well, I think it challenges us to be more aware, more critical, and more intentional about how we engage with these systems.
Right.
It's about asking ourselves questions like, who benefits from the way we talk about sex?
Right.
What are the unspoken rules that are shaping our desires? How are we complicit in our own control?
So it's like recognizing that even the most personal and intimate aspects of our lives are being shaped by forces that are way bigger than us.
Absolutely.
Like that saying, the personal is political.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that power isn't always a bad thing.
Oh, okay.
It can be creative.
Okay.
It can be life-affirming.
Right.
It can be used to build communities and to challenge oppressive norms.
Okay, so it's not about like rejecting power altogether.
Yeah.
It's about understanding it, questioning it, using it wisely.
Using it wisely,
Taking ownership of our own narrative.
Absolutely.
Our own desires and our own pleasure.
It's about reclaiming our agency.
Yes.
In a world that's constantly trying to define us, to categorize us.
Put us in these boxes.
And to control us.
That's really well said.
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up this first part of our deep dive into Foucault's repressive hypothesis, I want to leave everyone with this thought. Remember that flashlight that Foucault gave us.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to use it.
Shine it everywhere.
Shine it on your own experiences, your relationships, your understanding of sexuality.
You might be surprised by what you find.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is amazing, isn't it? Like how this thing that's supposed to be about, you know, cleansing and relieving guilt can get all tangled up with power and even a kind of twisted sense of pleasure.
It's weird.
But remember, like, the core of Foucault's argument here is that this repressive hypothesis, this idea that Victorians just, like, swept sexuality under the rug, it's way too simple. He's saying modern societies didn't repress sexuality. They just found, like, sneakier ways to control it.
So it's like instead of locking it up, they built this, like, invisible fence around it.
Exactly. It's the system that goes way beyond laws and religious rules. And it's woven into everything like education, medicine, social norms. It makes you wonder if we ever really escape it.
It's a little creepy.
It is. And to really get what Foucault's saying, we got to look at this idea of control in the context of what he calls biopower.
Biopower.
Yeah. So he argues that, like, in the 18th and 19th centuries, governments became obsessed with managing populations. Like, they wanted to understand birth rates, death rates, all that stuff.
Makes sense.
And guess what plays a big role in all that? Exactly. So it wasn't just about, like, moralizing about sex. It was about gathering information about it, analyzing it, using it to control people.
And what better way to get people to talk about it than to encourage them to, like,
confess.
Spill their guts.
Exactly.
So it's like this perfect storm.
It is. It's like this weird convergence of population control and this pressure to confess. All bundled up into this thing called biopower.
It's brilliant and creepy at the same time.
It really is. And this ties back to what we were talking about earlier about control going beyond just laws and religion. Think about those examples we were discussing.
Like the schools?
Yes, schools becoming these sites of surveillance. Or the way even like minor sexual transgressions could become these huge public spectacles. It's all about monitoring and regulating behavior.
But in these like sneaky ways.
Exactly. Very subtle. Very pervasive.
It's like Foucault's showing us this invisible hand. That's shaping our lives and how we think about sex. And it's not always about someone telling you no. It's more about creating a system where you internalize those rules without even realizing it.
You become complicit in your own control.
That's wild.
Yeah, and this brings us to one of Foucault's most interesting arguments.
Okay, what's that?
The emergence of the homosexual as like a distinct category of person in the 19th century.
Yep.
It's so normal to us now, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like we just assume that's how it's always been. But Foucault's saying this whole concept of being homosexual was basically invented.
So you were saying before the 19th century?
Yeah.
Like people didn't think of it that way?
Not really. I mean, same-sex acts might have been seen as sinful or illegal.
Right.
But this idea of a homosexual person, this like category of being, it just wasn't there.
So how did it happen?
Well, Foucault argues that it was this intense focus on classifying and analyzing sexuality that created that identity.
It's like we labeled it into existence.
In a way, yeah. And that makes you wonder, is something similar happening today with all the different labels we have around sexuality?
Good point. And this all goes back to what Foucault's saying about power and knowledge.
Yeah, they're totally intertwined.
So he's not just saying that people use knowledge to control other people.
Right.
He's saying that creating knowledge itself, like defining categories and labels.
That's a form of power.
That is deep.
It is. And, it's easy to get lost in all this talk about like webs of control and biopower and categories. Yeah. But it's important to remember that Foucault wasn't just trying to freak us out.
Right.
He was actually trying to help us understand how power works. So we could resist it.
So it's like he's giving us a map of the system.
Yeah, a map of the system so we can find the exits.
I like that. And that's why his work is still so relevant today.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a world that's increasingly digital, interconnected.
And complex.
So complex.
It's like Foucault was ahead of his time.
Yeah, like he predicted all this stuff.
In a way. Yeah.
It's crazy. And it makes you wonder what he would have thought about things like social media.
Oh, man, social media.
Yeah.
I think he would have had a field day with that.
Because it's like the panopticon on steroids.
It is. It's like everyone's watching everyone else.
Yeah. And we're all performing for each other.
And confessing our deepest secrets.
Right. And judging each other.
Oh, yeah. Constantly judging.
It's wild, but there's also this like weird pleasure in it all.
Right. Like we get off on being seen.
On getting likes and validation.
Even if it comes with a side of surveillance.
So it's like this complicated mix of freedom and control.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, because it's not always clear cut.
Right.
Like, is this good? Is this bad?
It's both.
Yeah.
It's this constant negotiation between our desire for connection and this system that's designed to like capture our attention.
And our data.
Yeah, and ultimately our desires.
It's like we're dancing on this razor's edge.
We are.
Yeah, it's enough to make your head spin.
It is, but before we get too dizzy, let's bring it back to Foucault.
Okay.
And what he was really trying to achieve with his work.
Yeah, because he wasn't just trying to make us paranoid.
No, not at all. Yeah. He was really concerned with how power operates in these subtle, invisible ways.
Right.
And he believed that by understanding those mechanisms, we could start to resist them.
So it's not about giving us all the answers.
Yes.
It's more about giving us the tools to think critically.
Exactly, to ask the right questions.
So it's like he's handing us this flashlight. And he's saying, go explore the dark corners.
Go explore.
But he's not telling us what we're going to find.
Right. That's up to us.
I love that.
And I think that's why his work is so important today.
Yeah, more than ever.
Yeah, because the questions he was asking about power and knowledge and sexuality, they're even more urgent now.
Yeah, in a world that's so...
digital connects.
Where does this leave us?
Good question.
Like if we accept Foucault's argument that sexuality isn't just about repression or liberation, but it's about this complex web of power and discourse.
Right.
What does that mean for our own lives?
Well, I think it means we have to be more aware and more critical and more intentional about how we engage with these systems.
Like how so?
Well, it starts with asking ourselves tough questions.
Okay, like what?
Like who benefits from the way we talk about sex?
Okay.
What are the unspoken rules that are shaping our desires?
Right.
How are we complicit in our own control?
It's like we need to wake up and see the matrix.
Exactly. We need to see the code.
Yeah, and recognize that even our most personal experiences.
Yeah, even the stuff that feels most private.
Are being shaped by these forces that are way bigger than us.
It's like that saying, the personal is political.
Right.
It's all connected.
Okay, so we're not just passive victims here.
No, definitely not.
We have agency.
We do.
But we need to be aware of how power is operating.
Yeah, and then we can start to use it for good.
So it's not about rejecting power altogether.
No.
It's about understanding it. Questioning it.
Yeah.
And using it wisely.
Using it wisely to create a world that's better for everyone.
So what you're saying is we need to become like power ninjas.
Power ninjas, I love it.
Right, like stealthy and skilled.
Able to navigate the system and use it to our advantage.
I'm into it.
Me too.
It's true though, isn't it? We've kind of become like these mini Foucaults running around online.
Yeah, like little panopticon guards policing each other's behavior.
It's like we can't resist the urge to like put ourselves and everyone else under the microscope.
Yeah, and it all ties back to that confession thing we were talking about.
Right, like needing to perform our identities for everyone to see.
Exactly, and it's not always coming from a bad place.
Right, like sometimes it's just about wanting to connect with people.
To share our experiences.
To feel seen.
Yeah, but it all gets filtered through this system.
That wants to track our every move.
That wants to know everything about us.
Our hopes, our dreams, our deepest fears.
And then sell us stuff.
Oh yeah, capitalism never sleeps.
Never sleeps, so it's this weird dance, you know.
Between freedom and control.
Yeah, like one step forward, two steps back.
But Foucault, I don't think he was trying to make us feel hopeless.
No, I don't think so either.
Right, like he wasn't just a doom and gloom kind of guy.
I think he really believed that knowledge is power.
In a good way.
Yeah, like if we understand how power works, we can start to challenge it.
Okay, so it's about empowerment.
Exactly. It's about giving people the tools to think critically about the world around them.
So it's like he's saying, hey, don't just accept things at face value.
Yeah, question everything.
Look under the hood.
Especially when it comes to something as personal and powerful as sexuality.
And that's why I think his work is still so relevant today.
Absolutely, because the questions he was asking back then, they're even more important now.
In this crazy digital world we live in.
Yeah, a world where everything's connected and everyone's watching.
It's like Foucault was a prophet.
Maybe he was onto something.
So where does this all leave us?
That's $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah, like if we buy what Foucault's selling.
About this whole web of power and discourse.
How do we actually live our lives?
Well, I think it starts with being aware.
Aware of what?
Of the forces that are shaping our desires.
Okay.
Our beliefs, our experiences.
So it's like we need to develop this Foucaultian X-ray vision.
Exactly. We got to see the invisible structures.
That are all around us.
And then we can start to ask ourselves some tough questions.
Like what?
Like, who benefits from the way we talk about sex?
Okay.
Whose interests are being served by these norms and expectations?
Right.
And how can we resist them?
Because it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. Like, power isn't inherently evil.
It's just a tool.
Exactly. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
So we need to learn how to wield it responsibly.
Exactly. We need to become power ninjas.
Power ninjas. I love it.
Skilled and strategic.
Able to navigate the system without getting trapped in it.
And most importantly, using our power to create a world that's more just and equitable for everyone.
That's a great note to end on.
Yeah, it's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into Foucault.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep using that Foucauldian flashlight.
Don't be afraid of the dark.
Until next time.
See